All right, okay. I think that is pretty much everyone. It's a big influx of people, which is great. So yeah, hi everyone. Welcome to the Harvest Mouse survey refresher training. Thank you everyone for joining us. We hope that you will find this helpful. Before we get started, I'm just going to go over a little bit of housekeeping. So firstly, some introductions. My name is Afrika and I'm the Mammal Society's Data and Research Officer. So alongside our members and committees, I manage the National Harvest Mouse Survey. If you have any questions that maybe we can't get to today, or you think of something later down the line about this project or any of our other science projects as well, then feel free to send me an email. Or you can also email the science inbox as well. So I'll just add those to the chat really quickly so everyone can see that. There we go. Um, so yes, so just as we were getting started, firstly, I just have a couple of poll questions just to get an idea of people's involvement with the National Harvest Mouse Survey. It's just whether this is completely new to you, or if you've taken part before, um, and how you're planning on doing the surveys as well, if you're doing it as part of a group or individually. So I'll just put those poll questions up. Hopefully everyone can see that. I'm also doing that. I'll let Derek let you introduce yourself, and B, if you could introduce yourself after as well.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Derek Crawley. I've been involved in the National Harvest Mouse Survey since its inception, and a little bit before that as well. And I'll be talking later on about how to actually go about surveys. And at the Mammal Society, I'm currently vice chair, and I'm also chair of the training and the local groups. So if you need to get hold of me, my address is, I'll put that in the chat as well. Thank you.
Hi guys, I am Bia. I've been helping out the Mammal Society with this year's analysis of the data we've received. And we've done some new things this year, and I have been in charge of getting all of that running. If anyone has any questions for me, you can either type them in chat or email Afrika and she will get back to me and we'll get back to you. Yeah, that's it.
Amazing. Thank you guys. So yeah, as Bea was saying, you're welcome, in fact, encouraged to ask questions. You can use the Q&A tool, which should be on the bottom of the Zoom call. If you just see Q&A, you can ask questions in there. If someone asks a question that you also want to ask, like feel free to just upvote it. And if needed, you can also use the chat as well. And if anyone feels if they want to introduce themselves, if you feel comfortable with that, please go ahead as well. It's nice to see who's here today. Um, just to give a little bit of a plan just for the webinar, so we're just going to give a bit of context about the National Harvest Mouse Survey. Bee's just going to talk a little bit about the results from the most recent report, which should give you an idea of like how we're using the data that you collect. I'll talk a little bit about the changes we are making to the data collection process, and Derek, as he said, will run through on how to actually carry out the surveys and how to identify nests and so on. So, B, I will hand over to you if you want to give a little summary.
All right. So I will be talking a little bit about how we use the data that is collected in these surveys. Up until this previous year, we were surveying places based mostly on expert opinion. So where experts, according to the knowledge we have, would say that we would find these harvest mouse. This year, we have added a little bit of a new technique called species distribution modeling, where you give certain software information regarding the habitat of the mice alongside the presence data that we have collected, that you guys have collected throughout the year. And the software is able to calculate, based on the habitat that is present in the UK, where else the mouse might be that we are not aware of yet. So we did the basic statistics as we always do. So we know that, for example, from the previous year, the number of surveys has decreased to 298, down from 435. The nests we have found have also decreased, but comparatively not by much, from 1,600, they're about to 1,300. However, the presence only records have actually increased compared to the previous season. They've almost doubled from 387 to 768. So that's pretty good. Geographical coverage has declined a little bit, but we know that this is probably due to a lot of weather events and a little bit of a lack of people able to do these things at the correct times. We received a lot of emails from people that were saying, you know, routes that we previously do, that we usually get to, were flooded. We didn't have access to it, so that's understandable. And if I am able to share my screen here, I will do my best to show you guys the map that we have obtained. I will. This is just a bit of an image from the whole progress report, but I will just show you just the one image if it allows me to do that. And here we go. So if you guys can see the map on the screen, is everyone able to see that? Effie, Derek, yeah, okay.
Yep.
So out here we have a map of the UK and Northern Ireland, and whoops. So the blue areas here are the areas where the software has said that it's unlikely that we are going to find any mice there. And as the colors ramp up all the way up to a dark red, that's increasing habitat suitability. So we're more likely to find harvest mouse if we go looking for them. The reason this is important is because it adds a little bit of layer of information in on top of the knowledge that we already have from the experts that have been doing this for years and years, and they have all this knowledge, but we might still be missing some patterns. This technique allows us to find more areas where we might find the harvest mice that we are not expecting. So we use your data to calculate these maps. So you guys are giving us very valuable information, not only about where we already know the mice are and how many of them more or less are going to be in certain areas, but also where they can be that we are not aware of and that we can expand the survey to cover in future years to see if we can find a more accurate population count or population distribution in the UK. So yeah, this is what you guys' hard work comes down to. And yeah, I'm happy to take any questions, and I'll send it back to Effie now as soon as I can stop this. Pardon me, I'm not very familiar with Zoom. Here we go. Back to you, Effie.
Amazing, thank you, B. So yeah, this is the fifth year that the Mammoth Society has run the survey, and you know, as B's shown there, we've obviously gathered a lot of great data around the distribution of harvest mice in the UK, obviously thanks to volunteers such as yourselves. Sorry, I just do see someone's hand up there. Oh, maybe it was a mistake. Sorry about that. Also remember you can either put in the chat if you have a question or the Q&A tool as well. So yeah, as I was saying, we've obviously gathered a lot of great data around the distribution of harvest mice in the UK, thanks to volunteers such as yourselves, and we're at a point where we can really start to explore other questions other than just the distribution of harvest mice, such as, you know, what type of habitats and habitat characteristics are harvest mice most likely found in or not found in. That's why this year we're making a few changes in the data collection submission process. It's very similar to previous years. However, we've added some additional entry columns that focus specifically on habitat. Before, of course, as many of you know, we did ask for some habitat information. However, these were mostly free text responses, and we found that this makes it quite difficult to statistically analyze, as you know, responses can be maybe inconsistent or too varied. So I can share my screen just so we can have a quick look at what those new columns look like. There we go. So you'll be able to see here, this is an example one where I've filled it out so you can see how it would look. Much of it is the same as before, it's just that with some additional columns. So here, you know, the new ones you have, it's not new necessarily this one, but habitat type. You'll have specific options that you can choose from. And obviously, a lot of you have already been filling this out. So, you know, field margin, rough grass, maybe it's an urban park, who, you know. Um, these ones along here are some of the new ones that we've added. So we were trying to think of some sort of biodiversity index that was still easy enough to answer and accessible, essentially. So we thought about looking at species richness when it comes to plant diversity. So it would be gauging just approximately like in that patch, how many different species can you eyeball essentially. Vegetation height, looking at having different categories. So is the vegetation predominantly below 30 centimeters? Is it between 30 and 60, or is it above? And then looking at the vegetation density as well. So having, is it sparse, moderate, dense? As you can see, these different questions here on connectivity as well. Um, we did previously have a column about evidence of management. Again, this was free text. We've just put it into these categorical answers as well to help us during analysis. So either it's there's some indication of it being managed, or it not being managed, or don't know. And any of those is obviously fine. Um, I currently am in the process of updating our survey protocol. And of course, we already have kind of a nest identification guide as well, which can be found on the National Harvest Mouse Survey page on the website. But I'm also creating a habitat field guide, which will have habitat type examples, and also a visual guide of how to answer these questions as well. So obviously we'll be sending out this recording to everyone, and along with that will be those resources as well, which will go into a bit more detail. Um, However, just for time's sake, I will let Derek take on the rest, okay? Oh, mute. Sorry.
All right, before I can we do that, can I ask B, can you reshare that map again? Because I think there are some important things that we need to say a little bit extra about that map, because some of the areas look like it's not very good for harvest mice, but that's partly because those areas haven't been surveyed and haven't been surveyed that much. So where you can see some of these really dark blue areas where it's suggesting that the habitat isn't quite correct, you've got to bear in mind within that one for this prediction is that quite a few of those areas haven't been surveyed, so we haven't got the data to go into it. Is that something fair to say, B? Is that a...
That is very fair to say. And we also have the opposite. So you can see here on this corner here of Wales and down this border here that there are a lot of little red areas that would indicate that there's a very good habitat suitability, that it's quite good for them. But what we'll notice when we go into the presence data we were given is that there's a group, a mammal group, that is repeatedly surveying the same area throughout the year or the years, and that skews the software to think, oh, there's so many mice here, it must be because it's a very good habitat. While in fact it's more that it's being repeatedly surveyed, whereas areas around it are not, and that is giving it a false idea, a false correlation there, which is why Effie and I and our older colleague Ross were thinking of changing the way that we survey the harvest mouse a little bit next season, so that we are not relying as heavily. We'll still obviously be doing the surveying and the hectads and tetrads that we've been doing so far, but not relying as heavily on them to diversify the areas where we're surveying, so as to diminish this skew of the data that we're getting from repeatedly surveying the exact same spots over and over again. So yeah, absolutely, Derek, it's absolutely correct what you said, and the opposite is true as well.
And therefore, the thing that we would very much like to happen this year is for some of those more bluey areas is to do more surveys in them to try and update this map to see whether or not that's the case.
Yeah,
and that's what
absolutely.
we'll sort of move on to later. I know that Scotland's always been a little bit of an interest one within there, and that we have obtained records from that central belt and a little bit on the south of Scotland. But then we've also had some up in Aberdeen, and also there's been one on the very far northern coast a couple of years before this survey started. So we know that they're actually in there. There was one actually on Cairngorm, lower slopes of Cairngorm as well, but not enough people are looking in Scotland. So again, if you're going up there this winter, then it'd be worthwhile looking and just giving us that information on habitat type of where people are looking and everything else that goes with it. Thank you for that. If you take that one down, I'll share my screen.
There we go.
Okay. Now, this was a presentation from last year. So let me just let go. That'll go. So this is just a review to say why we're actually doing everything else. I'll just skip over this particular one and show you a nice cuddly picture of a harvest mice, and then look at the different methods that we've actually got of how we can actually record them. So you might be very lucky and actually see one. To be honest, I've been looking for a number of years and I've only seen about 2 wild to go with it, but there's a possibility there. We get going across the top of the picture. Occasionally we get dead ones being brought in by cats. It's still a valid record. It doesn't necessarily show us the habitat that it's in because the cats will move the animal, but it's there. We can put out live traps for them. You can see the one here, I've got an actual excluder on it. That's an 11 mil grid on that. That stops everything but pygmy shrews and harvest mice get through. Everything else is excluded, so it gives us a fairly decent record within that. We have tried on numerous occasions to actually catch harvest mice at height in vegetation, but normally we manage to catch them better on the ground. You've got the nest survey, which is what we're going to be concentrating on in a minute. But then going across, we have had people try to train their dogs to actually sniff out the nests, although that has been somewhat successful, and it takes a while to train your dog up to that level. You can see that the nests do come out slightly hotter within a thermal survey, and some people, again, when doing nest searches, will actually use a thermal camera to see if you can't get just that differentiation into the actual grass areas that we're looking. The other methods is this, we've now got quite a few audio methods where you can put out recorders, and occasionally harvest mice do vocalize, and if we can pick that up, then that'll be another method of saying a positive to go with it. You do find them in owl pellets, but their skulls are so small and delicate, it's very hard to find a good example, but you might just get a lower jaw or an upper jaw. And again, if you use the photographic guide that the Mammal Society produced, then it gives you a good indication of when you found the harvest mouses. One of the root canals has got 5 root canals on one of the upper teeth. And then we are also picking them up on the small mammal camera boxes, and that's another good way of finding them. But by far the majority of what we're looking at for you to do is to go out and find old breeding nests or even solitary nests that are in grassland areas. Now, as far as this goes, the important thing here is that the harvest mouse is the only British mammal that has a prehensile tail. This tail is very important. It allows the mouse to sit on one grass stem, hang on with its tail and its 2 back legs, reach across to the next stem where it can actually grab a leaf, and then as it feeds its leaf through its teeth, it splits those vertical veins and allows 2 bits of grass still living to then be woven into a ball that makes the breeding nest that goes with it. And this is basically a quick picture of how they actually do that, sitting on one of those stems, and then over about a 3 or 4 day period, it takes them to actually build up that nest. They have a new nest for every breeding success. So every new litter, they'll make a new nest. So sometimes when we're looking through the vegetation, we can find 2 nests very close to each other, suggesting that is the same individual. Because although they they have a home range, a little territory, and they do defend it to a certain extent, but at the same time they can coexist within the same sort of area without too much difficulty if there's enough vegetation there. So it's this, you're really looking for vegetation where the mouse can do this. And unfortunately, on most cornfields these days, that's not the case. The corn is actually sown out and drilled with set distances apart, and you don't tend to have the space in between for the leaves to come together and the animal to move through that vegetation anymore. It was fine in the old days when it tended to be hand sown rather than anywhere else, and therefore the stems occasionally would get there. And it's known as the harvest mouse because as you cut the harvest, you could see the mice actually running out from there. So one of the things you need to do is trying to work out where best to look. And this is going to be slightly against what we partly want you to do, is to try and work out whether or not the vegetation is close enough together to put for a harvest mouse to actually go in there. So on this Phragmites bed, you can actually look through those stems, and therefore it's unlikely that a mouse is actually going to be using that because it can't reach between them to get the leaves and move forward. It's not impossible. Quite a few people have great success using reed beds. I always find that they have to be really close together, and it tends to work better when the actual stems have fallen together in a much closer clump for you to actually find those nests. So this is what we found in previous years with the habitat, with the different types of habitats and where the mice are most likely found within those. And you can see there are some that stand out a little bit better than other, and field margin tends to be the one within that, but that does tend to be a little bit regional. But those 2 are sort of the most useful within this. it is a case of knowing where to look to try and find your harvest mice. So this is a nice meadow, but here you're not going to find harvest mice in the foreground where we're looking at the moment. Here we're actually looking for field voles, but in that background, when you go out towards the river, this a lake, in fact, on this one, you can see the taller vegetation where you've actually got stems that are coming together with a leaf layer much higher up is more likely to be where you're going to find the harvest mice within that. So although, yes, you could spend time going through this low vegetation, this low grassland, you're not going to find the harvest mice. And this is going to complicate what we're asking you to do in a certain extent, but you could spend an awful long time and you're not going to find a nest there unless there are certain types of grasses, which I'm going to come on to in a minute. So here, again, you've got different types of vegetation you can look for. In the foreground, we've got cotsfoot grass. It's a tussocky grass. The actual tall stems here are the seed heads. You're not going to find the harvest mice at that height. You're going to find them in the actual tussocks down the bottom. The lady off to your left-hand side is again on short grassland, so she's again looking for field voles. Behind her, when you go in towards that wetland, and again where the leaves are a lot closer together on some of those reed canary grasses and rushes, you're more likely to find your harvest mouse. So it's again, although it's you could still find them in some of the clumps in the short grass, you're more likely to find them when that vegetation is a little bit closer together. So here we've got grasses actually growing up through a structure. There's actually a fence in the middle of this, as well as a load of bramble. And as you've got those grasses pushing up through and being supported, again, this is going to be a good place to actually look for harvest mice. You can see how close together the stems are, and that makes a difference to what you're going to find within it. But again, it'd be really interesting to find out if this is more popular for harvest mice within the bramble and everything else, rather than it being a standalone clump that gets hit by the winter weather and starts to fall over, to find out which one's the better site to actually encourage harvest mice and find harvest mouse nests in. And on this particular section, this was just one of those times that I was driving past. I thought, oh, that looks likely. Jumped out, and hey presto, you can see two nests just in that vegetation, just on the left-hand side. There's one about 3/4 of the way down, and there's one about halfway down on that picture. Does make it quite hard, and this is some of the problems that you're going to find. You need to be able to sift through the vegetation almost like a fine tooth comb, because you're looking for a ball of vegetation that is the same color as the vegetation. In October at the moment, you will occasionally come across green nests where you've still got growth, where the nest is still basically active. It might still have late broods in. So if you find those, please leave them alone and take from there. Again, here, nice and simple, the stuff on the right-hand side, all that short grass, unlikely to find harvest mice. But down the ditch edge with these reed canary grasses growing through, you can see a nice solid layer of leaf, which allows the animal to move through it, and you're more likely to find the nests within here. So this is a nice stand of reed canary grass on a fairly wet site. That we've actually been looking at this site in Staffordshire now for 20 years, and we normally find harvest mice in here, but it does depend on the weather. This is early January. Most of it has been collapsed due to the wind, but we still managed to find nests both in the vegetation that's fallen over, as well as the clumps that are still together. And again, moving on to other one, this is a sedge. Got to be a little bit careful with these ones here. This is another marshland area. In fact, I'm due to go out this weekend and survey this site for harvest mice. Here, nice and close vegetation, lots of opportunities for nests to be with, but the sedges have got very sharp edges, and you have to be a little bit careful of your fingers and for cuts, etc. But we normally find quite a few here, and a few even going up onto the bank where you've got the tussock grasses again. Even in quite large open landscapes, due to set aside, you do get some good vegetation that can be used. So the picture on your right is recently cut down elephant grass, but we did manage to find a harvest mouse in that little section that's left, showing that they will utilize that vegetation. And on the right hand side, you've got a bird seed cover in a very arable area. Unlike to find it in the arable crop, but on the hedgerow edge, on the fence edge, and on this set aside area, there were plenty of nests, and this is down in Hampshire. We'll put this across to you. This is still up and running, although it hasn't been updated since 2004, I don't think. And this is a map that allows you to zoom in using that QR code and the web page there to go into a specific area and see what's been surveyed, what was positive, what was negative, and therefore we'll ensure that you actually get a chance to look at that later. So how do you find your site? We've shown you on that map there was an awful lot of blue areas. How do you work out where can I go to survey? Well, we can use Google Maps. We can use OS Maps with the photo vision on it, and from that you can actually zoom down and you can start to look for some of those rougher grass areas that have been there for a few years that might have tussocks, or it might be a reed bed, or it might be a slightly damp area. You can get permission on roads and footpaths to just stop if it's safe to do so. And just have a look around there. Or if you want to go on to private land, we suggest that you ask the landowner if you can just do a survey and explain to them why you're doing it, and the fact you're not going to be doing any damage whatsoever. You're merely just having a quick look through the vegetation for potential nests. But it gives you an idea, looking at that, to whereabouts you can go within your square. And it's again just looking at Google Maps, going up and down with your that little person you can put on a road, but the view, you can then look across your hedgerows. You can see that's a decent area. There's a possibility of taller vegetation in there, and that will be worth a survey, and that will definitely add to our knowledge of the areas that harvest mice prefer. This is what we suggest that you take. So a pair of decent footwear. We suggest wellies because some of these sites are going to be damp underfoot. We do not want you to go in above your welly level, or if you're wearing waders, above your wader level, which is still a temptation, shall we say. You do get a little bit involved in all of this. A pair of gloves is very useful because you don't want to cut your hands on the vegetation, on the bramble, get stung by the nettles that you're separating it out. Having a stick is useful because you can use that to actually pry the vegetation apart to try and see whether you can find these nests. And then a tape measure that we're going to need to work out the height of the vegetation overall, and also the height of the nest, and even the size of the nest is quite useful information to actually grab hold of. And this is what we're basically looking for. There is a nest. It's still relatively green, but that one wasn't occupied. And what you can see around the outside of the nest, and actually on the nest itself, is this is where you've got the shredded grasses that show that harvest mice are actually the culprit of making this nest. And you can see that very clearly on your left-hand side with that single piece of grass split into about 4 or 5 different sections. And sometimes you can just find that alone, and that's sufficient to say harvest mice are in the area, even if you don't find a nest itself. The nests tend to be about tennis ball size if it's a breeding nest. Once the young have dispersed, they don't use it again. An individual nest for either the males or the females that are non-breeding is about the size of a golf ball. And over winter, they tend to make those very much down at ground level. But during the summer, they're in the vegetation because it gives them that advantage over other things like voles and mice that are also using this habitat. And by putting the nest higher up, it gives them a little bit of exclusivity and to be able to get the food that they need without the competition of the others. So all of these are good examples. Most of these are in different vegetations, as you can see. So the one that's sitting out at 17 inches off the ground, or what's that? That's 44 centimeters, is actually partly supported by some blackthorn. Got to be a little bit careful here. Harvest mice nests are always attached to the vegetation, whereas nests that look very similar to these that are just plonked in the vegetation could quite easily be dormice nests. Now, you might not have come across any dormice within your area, but if the nest is just sitting on that blackthorn on its own, there's a good possibility that it might be that. And that's where you probably need to go down some DNA route to actually confirm which one it is. Just get in contact with society and we'll sort you out on that. You'll see the one in the middle on the sedges. The actual nest is actually made out of grasses that are growing through the sedges and are actually then supported by the sedges as well. And some of those sedges have been incorporated, but it's actually smaller grass sections that they're actually using. But you can still see the tight ball. So when it's in your hand and you're actually sort of holding it, it doesn't fall apart. Unlike some other species that you might come across, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then on the one on the right-hand side, is more towards the clumps going down towards the tussock grasses, and that tends to be a little bit lower down. So here we've got some reed canary grass, very, very tightly packed vegetation, easy for a mouse to actually run through this. And there you can see the two gentlemen just parting the vegetation there to try and pull out the nest, which hopefully you can see quite low down within this one. So, but it's about between sort of half and the top third of the vegetation where the leaf matter is. Here we have one on a reed bed. So this is Phragmites. The nest very, very clear. This was the first harvest mouse nest for this particular site down at Weymouth. Everyone was very excited for it, and it was about 200 yards or even 100 yards from the visitor centre, which is even better. It's just a case of pulling back the vegetation slowly, parting it as with your fingers, and there was the nest just sitting there, again made out of different grasses than the Phragmites itself. Here we have another one, again in the sedges, and again using different things within this one. Here you have to be a little bit careful because these sedges, as they fall over, present a good platform for other species like bank voles and field voles to use. And they can make quite round domes of nests, but they're made up of very, very small, short pieces of grassland, just all packed together, and they've got no form with it. As you try to pull this one out, it's attached to the vegetation, which is that giveaway for a harvest mouse nest, as well as having the split vegetation. Here we've got some rushes that again are very well spent. They've all fallen over, but again, as you go through the clumps, you can just again find these nests much lower to the ground. This nest is just by that green glove. Just sitting within that area there. This one is in the tussock grasses of Cotsfoot. You can see those tall seed heads, but as you then go down into it, right in the top of that tussocks and sometimes to the edges, you then get the actual nest itself. So it's again a different place to look because where the leaves are is where you're going to find those nests within it. And there's a close-up of it just sitting there. Some are more obvious than others, but this is what you're trying to find. But it's important within Staffordshire, because we've been doing this a good sort of over 20 years now. we look in peculiar habitats as well. So this is lowland heath, this is black grass, and again, one of our members pulled out this harvest mouse nest out of that. So it's a very much an untypical area for harvest mice from what we've seen so far. And it's important that you keep looking in these areas where you've got vegetation, where the leaf matter is close enough together. And that's just a little bit closer. So it's probably only an individual nest. It's got the shredding within it, which classified it as harvest mice as opposed to the other species. Sometimes you can just be lucky, and as you're walking past the vegetation, they stick out like a sore thumb. So let's hope you can all spot this one. I'm looking for recognition on B and Africa's face, if they can spot it. Okay, and basically it is slightly off center, about 3/4 of the way up the page, just below where a branch goes horizontal off the actual tree itself. I don't know whether you can see my mouse, but it's basically, I'm just circling it with my mouse at the moment, and it's just there. That doesn't happen very often. You don't walk along and, hey presto, there's a harvest mouse nest in front of you. Normally you have to physically search for them by pulling apart those grass stems in order to find it. But not all nests that you're going to find are those of harvest mice. So the ones on your right, left of the screen, these are field vole nests made up of short pieces of grass that are just piled together, and the field vole will actually just sneak in underneath that and then wrap itself round in the middle to make it a slightly ballish, but when you hold it, it all falls apart. The ones in the middle are actually dormice nests, and you've got the one where you've got a nest that looks very similar to a harvest mouse, but it's actually within the branches of a hawthorn on this occasion. And the one below is a brilliant little ball of vegetation. And this one was actually a hibernating nest people found when they were doing some clearance work on a nature reserve. The one on the right-hand side, it's an awful lot bigger than you'd expect a harvest mouse nest to be. And therefore, we still haven't made our mind up of what this one was, although it did have the characteristics of harvest mice, but you don't normally expect them to find them that big, because that works out at a good, about 20 centimeters big, and you don't normally expect them to be that large. But occasionally you do find oddities. You do obviously get birds' nests in these areas as well, especially things like reed warbler and sedge warbler. And although they tend to sometimes put them around, by the time we come to survey, we find that most of those have actually fallen out of the vegetation. There is a how to identify sheet that we can send you that goes through the sequence of what's there or not, and there's even one with pictures these days as well. So if you want to have one of these sheets, drop us a line, and we'll make sure that we send you that. And that's it, unless there are any other questions, because that was quite a run through.
I don't believe we've had any questions on the Q&A, but if anyone has any questions that they maybe want to pop in the chat about what Derek's talked about, or B, and we can answer.
Okay, so let's have a quick. So Hemmer has asked, what's the use of a harvest mouse and what's the purpose of doing this? To answer that one, it's one of the many small mammals that are that we have in the UK, and as a purpose, their purpose is basically they are a food source for an awful lot of our carnivorous, both mammals and birds. And therefore they have a purpose within that. The reason that we are doing this is that when we produce the National Atlas, we noticed that the number of harvest mice being recorded was dwindling, and therefore we didn't know what their status was. And although we've been trying to look nationally for the last 5 years, I have to say we've got a good indication that in many counties where lots of people have been looking, they are very common. And we're finding that, again, we need to look for them to almost prove this.
Yeah, and Charlie asked, how do I select my square on the National Harvest Mice website? So it's not as much as selecting your square through any sort of process on the website, but we have the map now that Bee created from the last report, and in this you can see obviously your area and the different areas surrounding in terms of suitability and kind of gauge that of, okay, well, this area next to me is all red. So maybe I'm most likely to find a suitable habitat in this area, whereas like adjacent to that, it's all blue. So I could also try and investigate that area as well. I don't know if Derek, you want to add on to that as
Yeah,
well.
I think Charlie, it's a case of if you look at that interactive map that was on the PowerPoint, then that'll show you what's been seen in your area. And you can either go back and look in those areas first if you've never found a harvest mouse before, or you can go elsewhere. We really like you to go elsewhere to try and find out what's actually around that area. But at the same time, it's it helps if you go somewhere where you know there are harvest mice, so you can get your eye in to find those nests. It's one of those really peculiar things. I don't wish to put people off, but you need to. It's a good activity for a group because you learn off each other. Every nest that's found, you can go and have a look at it, get your eye in, and take it on from there. When we first started doing this, my group used to swear blind that I had them in my pocket because I'd walk behind them and point out all the ones that they've missed.
There's also just to kind of tail onto that as well, like something that we have learned through um, the modeling that's been done in the previous report just there as well is that non-detections are just as valuable as detections as well. That really feeds into the data and creates a much clearer picture about the distribution, or a much more accurate, I would say, or realistic. So, even if you go somewhere that you think, "Oh, I probably won't find anything," that is still really valuable for us to understand, especially with the kind of additional habitat information that we're asking for on the surveys as well. So it's just something to bear in mind for this season.
Yeah, there's two things just to add to that one. Please use the Mammal Mapper app. That's got a dedicated harvest mouse survey section within it. But at the same time, we'd like you to add the additional information onto the Excel sheet as well. It's useful to have the Mapper app because that'll actually tell us how long you've been looking for, where you've been within that site, and also whether it's a negative. If it's a negative record, we still get all that data back, and we can then look it up on GIS information. How do the mice cope with limited connectivity? That again is something that we don't really know. We do know that if areas that have been managed, the mice must actually go back into hedgerow edges and survive and then recolonize the next year. We've seen that happen more than once, but again, we haven't got the full information on it. As far as the genetic work goes, it's something that we are very interested in, but because there are two issues here. One is that an awful lot of people do unregistered re-releases. We don't know what the genetics of our animals are. We don't know if they've actually been any health checks on them or anything else about them. People are putting them out because they are making the assumption that there aren't any harvest mice there. There probably are. They just haven't looked. So we are actually encouraging people to do at least 2 years worth of survey effort before you even consider a re-release, just to try and make sure that you're not adding new animals into an area and causing problems for the existing animals that are there. The genetics, they've got a very high turnover, having 3 to 4 litters a year. The genetics seem to be able to cope with a low population and then build it up. There's an assumption, again, difficult to prove, that they have high mortality in the winter, and therefore they need to actually push through with high numbers in the early spring, and those animals will actually be breeding by the late summer to help on with that one. Sally's asked, she's going to look on roadsides where she found them last year. Thank you very much indeed. You can basically now onwards. We think that we hope that the breeding season has finished, but we are still relatively warm. It was, what, 22 today, 20 degrees, which would keep the animals still there. So if you see very green nests, they might still have young in them. So we ask you to just be aware. So it might be worthwhile waiting a couple of weeks. Having said that, I found my first nest of the season last weekend, and that was an old nest without an issue at all.
I've just seen that Sharon asked there, are the new categorical features like vegetation height and density on the Excel recording template on the website? So currently they are not on there just yet, but obviously we'll be sending this recording to everyone that's signed up to the webinar, and we'll be sending the resources to do with the new, well, updated recording template in that email as well. And the actual recording template itself will be finalized by the end of the week. But there are still plenty of helpful resources as well, like the nest guide identification sheet, which is on the National Harvest Mouse page on our website. So basically, watch this space. It's coming.
Again, if you have any questions, or if you're unsure whether you found a nest there, then again you can email us and we'll give you help with any of that. Or if you're you're not confident looking for your own site, if you tell us which area you're in, there are normally some regional people that will actually help out through the local groups network.
So, Stephen, you had said you're surveying your work site where you found nests before. It sounds like it would be of more use to survey suitable habitats in surrounding areas rather than redoing the same place. It's an interesting one because both are true. It is helpful to know, um, if you've surveyed a site in a previous year and you survey it again this year, it's helpful to know, if there was a presence last year, is there a presence again this year or is there not? And that helps us to answer questions as to, well, why might that be? But at the same time, what we've also found through the habitat suitability is that we're needing to also survey sites that are maybe more random, or maybe not as intuitive, I suppose, to kind of offset that skew that we're seeing in our modelling. I don't know if B or Derek, you would add anything to that, but I think, yeah.
No, it's nice to go back to sites where you know that they've been there before. It gives you the confidence that you can find the nests again. But it'd be interesting to see how long it takes you to find nests this year as opposed to last year. So that information is still very useful to us. But at the same time, yes, I would look further afield to see whether it's there. So how does that harvest mouse or that population have greater connectivity, both along that linear habitat, but also does it then come broader and come out away from that linear habitat? Africa, there's one here from Jack asking about density. Is it the density of the tussock or is it the density of the plants that you're after?
It would be density of the tussocks, ideally, I believe. Um, and it would be, and as I say, in the Habitat Field Guide, there will be visual guidance on what that would look like. And it's basically also to be an indicator of um, whether it's a more isolated patch or if it's more closely connected with other types of habitat in the area as well. But there'll be visual guidance in the habitat field guide as well, where you can just, it will be the same as the nest field guide. You can download it, you can print it off, and you'll be able to take it into the fields with you. And hopefully that will make it a lot easier to kind of be able to look at the density or the amount of plants in the area, or whether it's connected to a larger habitat network, and through these images, um, intuitively be able to record your survey.
Going back to a comment from Charlie again, asked about the release of harvest mice by the two 13-year-old breeders, breeding lady, some girls who bred up 200 harvest mice and released them. They didn't carry out any pre-surveys on that site. We know that Devon has got a very, very good population of harvest mice. So although we commend them for their efforts for reintroducing a species, we feel that they could have done it in a more scientific and better way than we've got them. We can put them next, we can put them out here. So it's a very difficult one. We don't approve of ad hoc releases of harvest mice. We are working closely at the moment with BIAZA, which is the Zoo Federation, who have got a good population of harvest mice that they can breed for various releases. But we're working with them, and we've an agreement with them that we need to have 2 years worth of surveys before any additional harvest mice releases are done using their populations. And again, if you contact your local zoo, they're hopefully doing some surveys for us this year as well.
So that is pretty much time up for today. So thank you everyone for coming on to the call and joining us. Hopefully it was helpful. And if there was any questions that we weren't able to answer today, as we've said, please feel free to email any one of us as well, or the science inbox, and we'll get back to you. Thank you, Bea and Derek, for taking the time to do this tonight. And thank you everyone as well, just for your involvement and your participation in this project. So we actually wouldn't be able to do this without your help. So as I mentioned before, we will be sending out the recording of the webinar to everyone that signed up, and the survey protocol resources as well. So yeah, I hope everyone has a lovely night.
Good hunting.
Bye bye. Good luck.
Bye. Thanks.